Here, on Rain and Noodles, we ask the questions that nobody dares to ask. Where does Akuma get his hair done? Where can I get Hinoa's OnlyFans? Is Jill secretly a sandwich masquerading as a human? When may the devil cry? But the most dastardly of them all, should Capcom do E3 once again? One of these will be answered today, for you have stepped into the Noodle Zone. Hello everyone, Raiden here to talk about E3 2022. E3 2021. Some of you might still remember E3 2021. I sure as hell don't. But some of you who do may remember it as a very underwhelming E3. Like, sure, there were some cool announcements and all, but I'm gonna be real with you. I only watched one in full, and it was probably the worst of the presentations that year. The presentation I'm talking about is Capcom's. That's right, as a simp for the company that literally lets horny soy boy Twitter artists make Street Fighter costumes for them, I was actually excited to hear that Capcom was doing an E3 presentation. As a matter of fact, it was their first one, and I wanted to be there for the incredibly monumental occasion. Sadly though, I don't think Capcom thought this was as big a deal as we did. The general vibe I got from the presentation was, it was laziness. So even though E3 2022 is already cancelled, I wanted to share my piece about last year's E3 and make an argument that Capcom can do so much better with not that much more effort. We're talking the most minuscule amount of effort I could possibly ask for, literally just showing the work that they already did. Capcom has a unique opportunity afforded to them as a company to better appease its current fans and simultaneously generate new fans and in turn, new customers. But in order to do so, they have to not squander a pretty important presentation like E3, which is kind of what they did. And that's what we're going to be discussing in today's video. We already know Capcom's going to keep showing up to E3, but that's not what I'm arguing here today. What I'm arguing today is that Capcom should continue to run its own independent presentations. They shouldn't just fall back into hiding inside of Nintendo Directs or making brief appearances at Xbox or Sony's stage. They had a great idea, but the execution requires some work. And me, and absolutely nobody on the internet that they are totally, most certainly watching, planning, studying my movements. I'm here to point them in the right direction. At least I think it's right. I'm not sure. I don't own a giant publishing company, and it's totally possible I could be delusional. What I am for certainly not, though, is shutting up, so let's transition to the next scene. I am quickly going to go over Capcom's first ever E3 briefing, and we're going to be pointing out all the leaks in the reservoir, per se. I want to start by saying that I, among other people I've talked to, did not expect a lot from this E3 show. After all, it's their first one. However, despite this, everyone I talked to was incredibly disappointed. The show was allotted to be 30 minutes, so it would be insane for anyone to expect the world from Capcom here. However, I think it was also very reasonable to expect 30 minutes worth of content, ideally something new, which sadly is not what happened. Capcom's presentation did a lot of re-announcing things, shoving esports in everyone's faces, making false promises, and also desperately trying to fill airtime with whatever they could, in this case, Ace Attorney gameplay. That's right, they struggled to talk about their games for 30 minutes. I can talk about one Capcom game for literally like an hour or two. And I mean, that's just edited down. If you catch me off guard without preparation, I might actually talk your ear off. First, I want to talk a bit about presentation. The actual aesthetics of the show actually wasn't bad. They had an entire set for this as opposed to using a green screen like Nintendo has famously done in their direct presentations. But it was also decently conservative. It wasn't a massive stadium like Sony or Xbox usually has. This makes it all the more jarring that they spent some money on this and then for some reason just didn't announce anything. But go off, King, I guess. I'll touch a little bit more on what I just said later in the video. I also want to say that Rachel Querico, aka Seltzer, did a pretty decent job presenting the information. It can actually be pretty hard standing in front of a camera and just talking while also trying to not look awkward or uncomfortable. So I can respect her effort she put into this. I mean, I'm barely capable of sitting in front of a microphone, so I mean. She looked lively and acted very enthusiastic about the presentation as it went along, which is very much appreciated. Nothing really leapt out to me as executives holding a gun to her off screen. It seems like she was able to present herself in a natural way for the most part. However, some shining red Vokais probably would have been a nice cherry on top. You might not think that Seltzer doing her job is a big deal. The Vokais, however, are. But you gotta keep in mind, she easily could have just been some businessman who's completely disassociated from the audience and only really exists for all the investors watching. I hate that I have to acknowledge and give brownie points just for having experience in front of a camera, but you got intel to thank for that. Yikes. The first bit of news that came up was Resident Evil Village DLC. This seems like it was supposed to be their big hitter and they wanted to start on a good foot. But it was a little bit like starting on an amputated foot, like a foot that's not there, because that's essentially what the DLC was. Not to say that I expected much, I mean, this was announced a month after the game came out. But a little screen that says, yeah, we're making DLC was a tiny bit underwhelming to say the least. What's funny is at the time I recall not being too surprised that Village was going to get DLC. I just assumed it was going to get a season pass just like Resident Evil 7. However, in retrospect I probably should have been. A good chunk of Village's development team was actually different from Resident Evil 7, especially the leadership. It most likely had a completely different monetization strategy within the company as well. It's just odd that this seemed like their biggest announcement and yet they had almost nothing to show whatsoever. Odds are they were just going to release the game and immediately start on Resident Evil 9, which likely was already in pre-production given the clues laid out in Village's story. This DLC might also be a very convenient time buyer for Resident Evil 4 Remake, which appears to have been struggling with development if any of the rumors are true. Silly, Rainin. It's not struggling anymore. Now, despite hearing about this literally a whole year ago, we still know just about nothing about Village's DLC. It's sort of implied it'll be a whole season pass affair like Resident Evil 7 had, but who really knows? I just find it strange that Monster Hunter Rise might actually get its huge expansion both announced and released before we even get any details about Villages. There's a lot of silence on the Resident Evil front. Not anymore. Hey, speaking of development challenges, how about that RE-verse, huh? So, what's funny about RE-verse is they said literally in this presentation that RE-verse would be out next month. It's a whole year later and we still haven't really heard anything. The game certainly isn't playable. It's pretty clear that the game was delayed, and it's speculated that it's going through a massive rework right now given how poorly the beta went. I never got to play this beta. It's looking like I was pretty fortunate for missing out on it. I'm not gonna lie, but from what I've heard, it ain't the best. There's lots and lots of negativity surrounding it, some of them sounding very similar to the usual plague that curses every Capcom game that has remotely anything to do with netcode. You know, the one that makes the online suck in every game. So yeah, RE-verse didn't quite pan out well either. But I mean, let's be honest, was anyone really that excited for this game? If you were, you got my condolences, but me personally, my heart isn't ripped into pieces over how this turned out. So, Monster Hunter actually had a decent amount of announcements, believe it or not. For one, we got a trailer for Monster Hunter Stories 2. It was a little long in the tooth, but I mean, at least we saw something, and this game did actually come out, so it's already doing better than Resident Evil. The trailer would have been a lot better if we saw the Maiden Sisters, though. This has nothing to do with the Hinoa OnlyFans, I swear. I feel kind of bad for the RE fans who had to see all the MH fans get absolutely spoiled right afterwards. Also, what are these acronyms? It sounds like a war between two factions in a sci-fi novel. It's great. Part of the Monster Hunter Stories announcements was also the crossover with Rise. That's right, you can have a Palamute in Stories 2, plus Kimura outfits as well. And the crossover works the other way around too. So there's some cool Stories stuff in Rise as well. Personally, what got me the most excited was just the Rise content though. We got some genuinely pretty nice armor DLC for our endgame fashion hunters. Nothing, I'm telling you, nothing slays a monster like an absolutely savage fit. The new voices and dances are also super welcome. There's just too much meme potential with them. I love them so much. These DLC are actually more important than you think they are because Rise is a super social game. Monster Hunter is just not the same when you don't have friends to play with you. It's also not the same unless you can start a cult around the Dongo stand where you can just stream the cutscene to everybody in the group chat. Bonus points if you can turn it into a horror movie moment where everybody has the Yomogi voice equipped. The DLC actually is a lot of fun though, I'm not gonna lie. One time my friends and we actually did a cursed cosplay and I made the absolute worst Virgil imaginable. So yeah, I can always just appreciate more Monster Hunter stuff. And Rise got a lot of it, so that's pretty cool. Capcom also shared a roadmap for the game, but they kept the collaborations a little mysterious for some reason. I think if they just teased Sonic or Akuma a little, this announcement could have been completely wild. Especially since they both actually turned out pretty great. Now, I would have been super excited about Great Ace Attorney at this presentation if they didn't literally announce it like right before the show. Maybe they felt like they needed a few more eyeballs on the game, but that unwraps a whole another problem that I kinda gotta talk about right now. If Capcom was going to make an entire segment to bring more attention to a game they were releasing, why not talk about the other games that they're releasing? And it's around this point that Capcom's presentation starts to fall apart the most. There were games that Capcom was releasing around this period of time that they did not talk about in this presentation at all. Like, if they're gonna do this with Ace Attorney, why not also do it with Capcom Arcade Stadium or Ghosts and Goblins? I mean, what, do they not have enough time? I know that that isn't the case because they spent so much time just showing Great Ace Attorney gameplay, not even necessarily talking about the game, they just put gameplay on the screen for some reason. I mean, hey, it's nice that you're trying to get your American viewers interested in the game, you know? If the point of doing this entire E3 show is to make people interested in your content, and only your content, why would you tell people about only a fraction of your content? Why not divvy up a tiny bit of that Ace Attorney screen time and talk about the arcade games or Ghosts and Goblins? Instead, we just got a bunch of footage that seemingly hogs up what was likely dead air initially. I'll touch on this some more later, but for the most part, those are my thoughts on the Great Ace Attorney segment. It was mostly just a huge wasted opportunity by Capcom. It seems like Capcom just forgot about its own product somehow. The next and final announcement was Capcom's esports vomit that it likes to just absolutely upchuck everywhere they can. Don't get me wrong, I actually loosely follow the esports scene for Street Fighter. I watch my CPT matches, I have favorite players, I have lots of fun with CPT and I think it's super entertaining. That being said, I have never actually gotten excited any of the times Capcom drops one of these incredibly bland trailers. Mostly because they say a lot of nothing. I'd be telling a pretty big lie if I said I went giddy and started jumping over a Capcom Pro Tour trailer. So here's the main issue with this segment. Having a dedicated chunk about CPT instead of having a chunk for Street Fighter V itself poses a few issues. For one, there are people who like Street Fighter who just don't care about esports, so you're alienating that audience when your presentation clearly could have been used more resourcefully by talking about both topics. Two, they had almost nothing to say about CPT. They basically just kind of said, hey guys, don't worry, we're doing CPT again, even though I'm pretty sure no one was asking. I really don't think there was anyone who was too worried about there not being a CPT this year because, I mean, there's a CPT every year. Once again, Capcom just forgot about its own products and neglected the truckload it could have said about Street Fighter V itself. You know, the game that the CPT was attached to. I hate that I have to be the one to explain this and not Capcom, you know, the people who stand to actually gain from telling you about this. But Street Fighter V was renewed for an entire extra season of content after numerous netcode and balance fixes, and it literally shaped up to be probably one of the best years of Street Fighter V's entire lifetime on the market. Which is an achievement, by the way, because this last year's Street Fighter V basically had a skeleton crew. Said crew was somehow able to salvage the dumpster fire that Street Fighter V was and turn it into an actually fun to play game. Around this time we were getting good stages, pretty amazing characters, we were getting more costumes, entire new gameplay mechanics, all throughout 2021 and the beginning of 2022. This game was finishing with a massive bang. Remember when everyone was complaining that the entire game was very rush oriented and that there weren't many defensive options? they added in defensive options. It was actually really cool. I had a joke where the best way to play Street Fighter V was to play it the way it was made, which is, you know, you rush in and you piss everyone off. But hey, that joke doesn't apply anymore, so that's awesome. I could talk at great length about how they made Street Fighter V actually fun, but the point is that they fixed the game and didn't tell anyone. They chose to talk about CPT instead, and now I had to explain to several people that their favorite characters are in Street Fighter V now, and that they don't cost a fortune to get any of them, and that there are actually defensive options now, and that you don't have to pay an arm and a leg just to get a costume, 5 years after the game was even relevant. I think Capcom for some reason underestimates how many people stick with Street Fighter 2 and 4. A lot of them doing so because they tried 5 and were very underwhelmed by it. Or, you know, just playing a different game that was a lot better. Seriously, this was their opportunity to say, hey, hold up, we fixed it. It's a fun game now. There's lots of characters. There's cool mechanics. It's super approachable. You can have the whole game and almost all the hordes of DLC we made for $30. Please let us return on our investment of fixing this broken game for 5 years. But for some reason they didn't, and now I still get confused looks whenever I even mention Street Fighter V. Another shocking display of Capcom somehow forgetting its own products at E3. Like how? And that was that. No, for real, that was the entire show. There was nothing after that. So you can probably tell I got more and more frustrated with the presentation as it went on. It was massively disappointing, not only to me, but just about everyone else that I have talked to. Not to mention, it just didn't make a lot of business sense. Pretty much everyone agrees that Capcom definitely could have and should have talked about more. So I'm going to give some of my critiques now and offer some earnest feedback before I wrap up this video. I absolutely want Capcom to do its own E3 presentation again. However, I don't want them to be lazy with it once again. Having something like E3 is immensely helpful to a company like Capcom. Obviously, Capcom is going to continue to be present at E3. It's just that I'm of the opinion that they should keep doing their own standalone presentations. When someone like Capcom has their own briefing, they no longer need to think about what makes the most sense to share. When Capcom was competing for attention on the show floor with other companies, all they could really talk about were the big hitters. You know, like Devil May Cry, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, etc. That's not a problem anymore when Capcom has its own airtime where it has the ability to share everything. And that is the reason people were expecting at least something substantial. Capcom was paying for this space, so they must have had something to make it worth it, right? Apparently not. Capcom had this habit during this presentation to need to fill time for some reason, and then literally forget its own products, inversely creating the need to fill time. It was doing the work, but it wasn't turning it in. So funny personal story, when I was in elementary school, I literally did all the classwork and the homework, but I always forgot to turn it in. So I had bad grades in elementary school, despite going through all the effort of actually doing all the work and doing it correctly. And that's what Capcom's reminding me of right now. They're reminding me of me in elementary school, and it makes no sense. At least I have the pleasure of knowing that I was just a stupid kid that became a stupid adult. But I'm not a giant company, so I fail to see how a massive mistake like this could have possibly happened. When Capcom forgets about its own products like this, it misses crucial opportunities to stimulate its business, and maybe even excite its fans, possibly generate new ones. With a standalone format like this, you can also make subtle statements about your company that make you stand out amongst the competition and earn respect from viewers. For example, let's talk Capcom Arcade Stadium. 'Cause they didn't. Imagine just how huge of a roast this would have been as someone like Nintendo if Capcom paraded around that they had a huge library of old arcade games that they're not even going to charge an absurd online service for. You give Capcom a couple bucks per game and you can literally just buy your favorite ones and play them right away on whatever device you like. Easy. I actually bought all of them for like $40. Now, if you want to have the pleasure of playing Nintendo 64 games on your Switch, you gotta shell out $80 a year. There you go. There's your selling point, Capcom. I don't understand why that argument was so hard to make. There's an entire community of arcade enthusiasts. Half of them are playing Capcom arcade games. If you told those guys they could play those same games on something like their Switch without modding it, I'm sure they would have flipped out. Playing legacy content in general, even if it's not that old, is just a very valuable thing to have. The majority of my PS5 games are PS4 games, and it's the same with my Xbox. You hear that entire spiel I just went on? That's an example of how not talking about one thing actually damages Capcom in a way, and I didn't even talk about Ghosts and Goblins. Next, let's talk about exciting their fans, because a lot of Capcom fans tuned into this presentation and walked out underwhelmed. You don't want that. You want them to walk out pretty excited. Capcom actually had a good ball rolling with Monster Hunter Rise and World crossovers. My pitch is that they do this, but on a larger scale. I'd love to say Marvel vs. Capcom is the perfect solution to this problem, but given how Infinite went, I'm not betting my money on it. MVCI is another can of worms I might have to open one day in a completely separate video. So I know the following examples are absurd. I'm not expecting Capcom to do any of this, but bear with me for a second. It's just an example for the sake of argument. Let's say you got a bunch of Resident Evil fans. You need more Ace Attorney fans. Let's say Capcom is making another Ace Attorney. How about a funny non-canon case that involves Umbrella? And the solution to the case ties into the things we know about the world of Resident Evil. Maybe Umbrella has lobbied the court, and proving their involvement with the outbreak is actually pretty hard. You see that? Just by tacking something on to an already existing announcement, I've excited more fans than if I had just made that first announcement. Now, not only are Ace Attorney fans happy, but that's a good opportunity to make Resident Evil fans happy if, say, something happens and the next game's not going to be ready this year. Not that a small crossover is a replacement for a full game, of course, but if you did it this way, you at least wouldn't get the RE-verse fiasco. Here's another one. What if they had Dante or a Monster Hunter character show up in Street Fighter 6? Hey, that game actually got revealed lately. I mean, wouldn't you want to play as Elder Fugen? Wouldn't that be so cool? Like I said, I'm just spitballing crazy ideas. But wouldn't you be enormously excited if any of that actually happened? And you know what? Not only might you be excited, you might actually check those other games out now. It's a win-win. And I know that it's not that crazy of a concept because this is literally what Smash does, and Smash announcements gets everybody pumped. Even people who don't even play Smash that much. You guys probably get what I'm going for. You have less people upset at you at the end of an E3, and you even get a small benefit of being able to spread some fans over to where you need them the most. Hold up, hear me out. I'm gonna blow your mind. Street Fighter, Resident Evil, and Monster Hunter dating sim. Yeah, I just ended all wars. I think I'll take my Nobel Peace Prize, thank you very much. Now, let's talk about creating new fans and customers in general. With Capcom having its own dedicated presentation, it can have a larger variety of products it can showcase, therefore broadening its appeal. It also enables them more staying power in general. If Capcom has its own dedicated presentation, people will take it more seriously. If Capcom goes onto a stage and just announces a few games, people will think they're just a regular third-party developer. But the reality is, Capcom is an entire large publishing company and they have very many IPs, all of them unique in their own way. And with all of them unique in their own way, that means they each have their own audience. For example, let's say I'm a visual novels kind of guy. I'm not too interested in Devil May Cry and I'm not interested in Monster Hunter or Resident Evil. Those are too action-packed. However, I see something like Ace Attorney, all of a sudden I'm hooked. Or let's say I happen to be a retro games connoisseur. Those arcade games would have been very appealing to me. If Capcom took the time to talk about them, of course. Or say I just like my simple little games, something like Ghosts and Goblins might have been appealing to me. Notice how those three examples never would have been shown at a traditional E3 stage where Capcom has limited real estate for announcements. Again, this just illustrates why I was so frustrated that they didn't show everything, because this was the perfect opportunity to do so. And those are just the games they're making. Remember, Capcom is a publishing company. They could be outsourcing development to other studios and publishing it under their name. So we actually haven't even covered everything they could talk about. Going back to the topic of how it would benefit their brand image, I run into people who forget Capcom exists, which is just so funny because they make so much. Or maybe they don't necessarily forget Capcom exists, it's more like they just don't piece together that it's one company making all of these amazing games that they've played. Even I'm actually guilty of this to a degree. It wasn't until recently that I found out Shantae, the Game Boy game, it was actually published by Capcom. I would have never guessed. So imagine if someone who's played their fair share of video games just happens to watch the Capcom presentation and all of a sudden they recognize all of these IPs. They might actually stick around and see what else Capcom makes that they recognize. I've made my main points by now, so I'm going to start wrapping this up. A lot of it boils down to Capcom losing vital opportunities to make more money. But Capcom can only make more money if they give us, the people who follow them, more games to buy. We can't really buy a video game if we don't know that it exists. And we're not going to buy a video game if we're under the assumption that it's a bad one, when in reality that could have totally changed in the 5 years it has existed. Overall, it's bizarre that Capcom hasn't done this in the first place, but I'm hoping that maybe this is just a bad run and they could do a much better job next time. Now I can go on and on about all of this stuff, but I think I've about said all I needed to. Now, am I expecting every little suggestion I made to come to fruition? Not exactly. I understand that businesses, let alone businesses in an entirely different continent and culture, are very complicated. And as someone who obviously doesn't own one myself, let alone one with a massive audience that I need to be able to reach, I can't possibly have any idea what hurdles Capcom faced during the making of the 2021 presentation. It is absolutely possible that there is a valid reason that these mistakes happened in their presentation that I just simply do not know about. Maybe Capcom's eyes were a little bigger than their wallet, and securing that airtime was more expensive than they anticipated. And as a result, the budget had to be spread very thin in other places. This would be a very good reason why Capcom would not do these presentations again in the future. It's also possible that the continuing COVID-19 pandemic had some sort of impact on the production of the show as well. It's also possible that this is just an industry problem. For example, I didn't watch the Square Enix show, but I have a couple of friends who did, and they gave me a lot of complaints that were eerily similar to the complaints that I had about the Capcom one. And by far the biggest reason of them all, what reason does Capcom have to listen to an idiot on the internet? If Capcom ever implements the feedback I've given, it probably won't be because I said it. I wouldn't be surprised if they talked about this in-house. I'm not exactly a genius. I'm sure someone at the company probably said, "Hey, we should show more games at E3. What I do know by doing all of this speculation is that talking about this subject is fun. I have a lot of fun discussing this. I'll admit, one dude talking about a company's presentation, giving them feedback on how to make it a lot better, it sounds a little bit Orwellian. But I mostly made this video because I talked about it and I found such discussion fun to have. Do you have fun talking about Capcom? Why don't we talk about Capcom together down in the comments? I implore you, I actually do want to see your guys' opinions. Do you want to see Capcom host their own E3 again, or have you completely lost faith in them? Or maybe you have an idea of how a lot of these mistakes happened. Maybe, just maybe, there could be method to Capcom's madness during this presentation. Do you know what kind of sandwich Jill is? Is it one of those fancier boutique sub sandwiches, or is it like a 2 a.m. ham and cheese sandwich? I'd love to know. I'd probably have to step into the noodle zone again to find out, and I don't feel like doing that, so I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks. Without further ado, this simpering fool who obsesses over a company in a foreign country he's never seen has probably talked his heart out, so I'll bid everyone a good day. See ya. Hey everyone, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't smash that like button. I think you, sir, have hurt that thing enough. That's right, Kyle. I know you leave a like on every video you see, you bastard. Don't hurt that button. Unless maybe it bullied you in high school. I mean, if that's the case, why not teach the lesson? I won't say anything. Might want to take care of that subscribe button guy too. We don't want any witnesses after all. Jokes aside, go do what you want to do. If you'll excuse me, I discovered that I have this nonsensical inventory screen that I can't make go away. And I accidentally put my dog and my PC in there on accident. I don't know how to get him out. I'm like frightened right now, so I should probably go figure this out.